Let's do it.
This is the SEC Insider Hit. And it's presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue.
My producer is an Ole Miss alum when he hands me a topic sheet this morning and he says, which first-year head coaches will have the most success? And he leaves off Zach Arnett. He has Hugh Freeze, Deion Sanders, and Matt Rule. And 98.475% of my audience doesn't know who Matt Rule is. Now, I know who Matt Rule is, but maybe because, I was texting with Joe Judge the night that Matt Rule took the Carolina Panthers job, and that threw everything out of whack for the Mississippi State job, which then had Joe Judge go to Mississippi State alum to the New York Giants. But anyway, just so you'll know, going forward, Jason, nobody cares about Matt Rule. Now, the other two's legit.
Okay.
Hugh Freeze, obviously a tie here. He's from here, went to Southern Miss, coached at Ole Miss, all that. And Deion, Coach Prime's going to get beat by 1 million this week by TCU. And I don't even know. Oh, Nebraska plays Minnesota Thursday night.
Yeah.
Our next guest knows that. All right. The SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue, the official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show. We welcome in national college football analyst with ESPN, also recruiting, Tom Luginbill on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Luz, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good, and just hearing your in bump there. So, who made what was the list exactly of most successful first-year head coaches?
So he said which first-year head coach will have the most success, and he put Hugh Freeze, Deion Sanders, and Matt Rule on the list, and left off an in-state coach who happens to be a first-year head coach by the name of Zach Arnett.
Yeah, wow. How about Luke Fickell at Wisconsin?
That's another one.
He inherits 18 returning starters. He's got a quarterback in Tanner Mordecai.
He's got Phil Longo, who's a heck of an OC.
Yeah. So, and I'm trying to figure out, where is Colorado going to come up with the wins?
Oh, they're not.
I see two potential wins on their schedule. Maybe Stanford and maybe Colorado State.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think TCU, Sonny Dykes and Kendall Briles and that crew, it's going to get ugly this weekend, Tom.
It may. We'll see, and we'll find out, with, a lot of the talk of the offseason and the transfer portal and the guys that were, brought into the program versus the guys that exited the program, how improved will they be? I mean, did they improve in some areas? Yeah, of course they did. But at the same time, you could make an argument that Colorado last year was the worst performing team in college football, maybe in all three phases, right? So you go from bad and terrible, and your upgrade is to what? Average or above average? Is that good enough? That's the question I think you have to ask, at least in this first cycle. Because I'm not saying it can't be done, but I think it's going to take 2 to 3 portal cycles and recruiting cycles for him to start to get that roster where it's going to actually need to be.
Yeah, and Luke's, the idea of 60-plus new players, that's not a recipe for success. I don't care if it's Bear Bryant or Coach Prime. It's just that's not going to work. And so I expect them to go 2-10 or 3-9, like you're talking about, and we'll see if Deion can hang in there, because I think it could be much the same the next year, and by then he may be totally losing his mind. All right, Florida, Utah. So Napier was up and down in year one. Whittingham has been there since Urban Meyer left to go to Florida, and he's been amazing, and he's that rock solid. They always win. They know who they are, and they actually play football like a little bit of us and a little bit of the Big Ten. They're rough and rugged. As one guy on this show said, Kyle Whittingham will come into your stadium, drink all your beers, and kick your ass. So Florida at Utah. Who do you like and why, Tom Luginbill?
Well, Rice-Eccles Stadium is a very difficult place to play, particularly at night. I think that place will be rocking. The simple answer to that question is, how healthy is Cam Rising? because I do think that's important. I do believe that plays a significant factor. And you are 100% right about how Utah is built. They are a physical, tough, built from the inside out football team that has depth, and virtually everybody back that they need on defense. And so I think there still are going to be spots where the Florida roster maybe has better pure athletes, but doesn't have the better team, isn't the better team unit yet. You just referenced something I think is really important is, Kyle Whittingham's been doing this for a long, long time, and there's only one way at that place, and everybody that knows is all in on it. For Florida, they're still trying to lay that foundation, right? They're still trying to build that, and I think there's advantages for Utah when it comes to that. And what are we going to see out of the quarterback position at Florida? Is Graham Mertz good enough? If he struggles, do they go to Jack Miller? Are they an upgrade from what they were last year with Anthony Richardson? I mean, I think that's somewhat of a fair question when you consider what his completion percentage was. He was dinged up and injured. Like, what if instead of having a 53% passer, what if they have a 63% passer? And what does that mean to the overall efficiency of the offense? So I think there's some fascinating things there offensively for Florida to look out for too.
Yeah, and then there's some talk that Utah, what they're going to do at quarterback as far as injuries. You mentioned Graham Mertz. What can you tell our listeners? Because they'll be locked in Thursday night. I mean, we got 2 Power 5 games, but that will trump Minnesota and Nebraska. No offense to Jason, who dropped Matt Rule in my topic sheet this morning, but we focus on the SEC and the Florida Gators and Utah. What can you tell us about Graham Mertz?
To this point, he has woefully underperformed what his anticipated hype and production was thought to be. That was the highest rated quarterback that Wisconsin had ever signed coming out of high school. And when I say that, everybody recruited him, Bo. I mean, he was a hot commodity. And then for whatever reason, he just hasn't been able to sustain any consistency. And listen, do you have great skill around you at Wisconsin? Probably not. Obviously, we know what the run game is all about there, and Braylon Allen's been just an absolute freight train for them at tailback. But I think you could make an argument that he'll maybe have better athletes around him at the skill spots at Florida, which is a good thing. And maybe that helps him perform a little bit better. He's got talent. He's a gifted player. But for whatever reason, that talent hasn't necessarily paralleled, consistent performance game in and game out. And I think that's what people have been frustrated with him, especially if you were a Wisconsin fan.
Okay. Let's move to Lane Kiffin and the quarterback position that we have discussed with you, but we're now down to, the first game of the season. And I understand it doesn't matter that I could play this weekend and they'd beat Mercer, but all about these two guys, Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders. From being head of recruiting at ESPN, you called Oklahoma State games. Spencer Sanders did not go to Ole Miss to sit. There's all this talk. Dart's better. Obviously, I think we expect most players to get a little bit better incrementally every year. But I get the sense that you still believe Spencer Sanders, when everything is on the table, that Spencer Sanders, maybe not by miles, but is a better quarterback. So I'm not worried about Mercer, but as this thing plays out and we get into the meat of the schedule, if you had to call it, do you believe it will eventually be Spencer Sanders' job?
If Jackson Dart does not improve his decision-making when it comes to taking care of the football. Lane Kiffin's not worried about coaching Jackson Dart's talent. Jackson Dart has a ton of talent. Jackson Dart can make all the throws. He can do everything you want a guy to do. He's got some savvy about his personality, but he has a penchant for taking risks with the football, and Lane's not going to have it. And I remember it happened last year in the first half against Georgia Tech on the road in Atlanta, and Lane was furious with him because of really two really poor decisions that he had made in the first half. And they were completely unnecessary decisions. And I can see why he was upset. So the thing with Spencer Sanders, it's the good and the bad. The guy has played a ton of football. I mean, he's thrown for 10,000 yards, right?
10,000 yards at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and he can run, and he's a dynamic player. He's just about, he's kind of just about seen everything you could throw at him. The downside is he's hurt a lot. And he played all through last year, very injured, had to miss, I think, a couple of games. But he wasn't the same guy. I'll give him tough. He is tough. He battles. He fights. I know there were a couple of weeks because I had the Texas-Oklahoma State game in Stillwater. And he had played in the previous 2 weeks but did not practice a day. Did not practice, but played in the game.
Wow.
So he's got some toughness, and I love that about him. So I think if he's healthy and Jackson Dart isn't careful with the football, then, yeah, Lane Kiffin's going to play him. I don't think you're left with any other choice. And hopefully from a mature perspective, a maturity perspective, that is really something that Jackson Dart takes ownership of. The decision-making, the when to live to play another down, and just don't create negative plays with the offense with your decisions.
Do you think there's another step for Will Rogers? Kevin Barbet's going to run it a little bit more. I do actually believe that they've got better personnel than they've had around Will since he's been there. He was thrown to the Wolves, and then a bunch of true freshmen had to play around him when Callan Hill threw his fit, and it just wasn't a good transit. Moorhead missed on a lot of kids. Good guy, but he missed bad on a lot of kids. So having said all that, I think that they've somewhat reloaded's not the word that I'm looking for, but they've got better personnel around Will. So having said all that, and look, the air raid and Leach and all that were great to Will Rogers and vice versa. Mm-hmm. But do you believe that that he can take another step forward this year?
Yeah, and I think he's going to have to because I think there will be more asked of him within the scheme. There was all this talk, right, about Sam Hartman at Notre Dame. And what would Sam Hartman be when he wasn't in the slow mesh, heavy RPO-based scheme that he was in for, 6 years or 5 years at Wake Forest? Well, at the end of the day, Sam Hartman has started 45 games in college football, right? Will Rogers has started a ton of games in college football. I think that he will adapt fine. I do think maybe some of the progression read stuff that he'll be asked to do will be a little bit different. So much of the original air raid, it wasn't attacking coverage, it was attacking areas of the field. And so I think I wouldn't have too many concerns just because he's played a lot. But he's probably going to be asked to do. He may be asked to do a lot more at the line of scrimmage, both pre and post snap.
Right.
He may be asked to do full field progression reads down to the check down. Like there just may be more on his plate. But it's one thing to say you're going to do that to a freshman and now expect him to make consistent good decisions. But when you're talking about a guy that's played as much ball as Will has, I think you feel pretty confident about it.
No, that's a good point. He started over 30 games, and that's a big deal. No doubt. And in any sport, but in college football. We're visiting with Tom Luginbill. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Are you allowed to say what game you have this week?
Yeah, I've got Clemson and Duke on Labor Day night.
Oh, I want to jump into this real quick. What are your expectations for Garrett Riley, who was the offensive coordinator at TCU? Dabo made a quick switch after a very, very disappointing year for Clemson. And this guy is very talented, just like his brother Lincoln Riley at Southern Cal. What are your expectations and what are you looking for from the Clemson offense with Garrett Riley?
Well, the expectations are extremely high because, when he arrived at SMU as a younger coach, and then later at TCU, and they start to kind of build the thing up, and they've inherited, pretty good players. At Clemson, you can make an argument that he's inherited some elite players. They're intact in their offensive line for the most part. The running back is a potential All-American candidate in Will Shipley. Antonio Williams is a go-to target and a vertical threat. They've also got a second running back in Phil Maffa. And I think what you'll see is you're going to see a little bit of what Lincoln Riley did at Oklahoma in his early years there in the two-back offense. And a lot of counter, inside and outside zone, and then a pace of play that's faster than what we've seen from Clemson, and getting back to vertical explosive plays. That was the one thing that was really lacking the last 2 years at Clemson, is DJ was not capable of doing it. I think as a play caller, Brandon Streeter got a little bit gun shy because he didn't feel confident that they were high percentage throws. Whereas, the previous, 6 years or 3 years with Deshaun and 3 years with Trevor, those things came at a pretty easy clip. So
yeah.
I do think you'll see a faster paced offense, a little bit of a different style in the run game. And then, you need Cade Klubnik to consistently be what he showed flashes of as a true freshman a year ago. At times it was very, very good. At other times, he looked like a true freshman. Is just about all true freshmen do. So they will have personnel that will be very difficult to contend with.
Are they still your favorite? Is Clemson still your favorite in the ACC, Tom, or is it Florida State?
It's Clemson until proven otherwise. We acted this last 2 years like the sky was falling in Clemson. They won 21 games.
That's a good point.
People were treating them like they're 7-5, right? And that was with mediocre quarterback play, and at times very average, especially 2 years ago, offensive line play. The defense is so good and so loaded that, and I also, and you know this too about Dabo, he loves to play the little old Clemson card.
Sure.
Right? And, the last several years they've gotten away from that because they've become so dominant that they're not little old Clemson anymore. And I think there's a part of him that kind of likes the fact that everybody's talking about Florida State. Everybody's talking about North Carolina. Everybody's talking about LSU and Georgia and Alabama. And he's like, fine, we'll just go on our merry way right over here and go about our business. But that team was far from a poor football team the last 2 years, even though there was a perception out there that they were a bad team. They weren't.
No, I like where you're going there. Clemson is the pick until Florida State proves us otherwise, even though they're trending in the right direction, which takes us to the game of the week. He is Tom Luginbill with ESPN. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Lugs will be calling the Clemson-Duke game on Monday, Labor Day, which is great. We get LSU and Florida State on Sunday. So here we go. Last year was a crazy game. Everybody went nuts. FSU won, and then LSU came back and had a really, really strong year, including the great win over Bama. They actually have an adult as their head coach now, and Brian Kelly. This is a neutral site game. I don't think that I don't think that impacts the game whatsoever, because LSU will be just fine in Orlando. Having said all that, as you handicap it, what are you looking for in this game between the Tigers and Seminoles?
I think the one major glaring difference in this game versus last year's game is LSU is a completely different football team on offense. I don't think they knew what they had in true freshman tight end Mason Taylor. They started two true freshmen, at each of the offensive tackle spots. They had not figured out quite how to utilize Jaden Daniels, right? So he's a little bit new. It's an entirely new scheme. And all of a sudden now, you look at how LSU ended the season. You look at what that offense became down the stretch. You watch how that game was played out when they beat Alabama at home. They're an entirely different football team from an identity standpoint. They know who they are. And I don't think they'll make the kicking game snafus that they made last year that plagued them. And that was really the other part of it that was a big deal. So, listen, all the pressure, in my opinion, is on Florida State. Everybody's in love with Florida State. LSU can just go out and play, right? But Florida State, and I think Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, he said it best, and he's right. And he put it on his programs. whether it's North Carolina playing South Carolina, whether it is Miami playing A&M, whether it's Florida State playing LSU. You want to change the narrative and the perception of the conference, you have to win those out-of-conference early, highly anticipated matchups.
Yeah.
And he told all of them, and he's right. And so I think that the onus is on Florida State here to live up to the hype, to be able to manage the expectation, and to play as good as everybody's expecting them to. And listen, I think they're going to be a good football team. I really do. We're going to find out about their maturity level. We're going to find out about whether they can handle being patted on the back for an entire offseason and come out and play like that. And that's why I think this game's just a little bit different. I don't think it will be as sloppy. Last year's game was pretty sloppy.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work out for Florida State. In fact, I think they could lose 2 of their first 4 games to LSU and Clemson and still be a good football team. But people will stop. Absolutely. And people will stop talking about them, and then they may rip off, a bunch of wins.
Exactly. That's exactly what they would do.
I think that could happen because I just think Clemson and LSU are in a better spot, but FSU is definitely trending the right way. All right, real quick, in your backyard, North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina's favored after losing Phil Longo, and that really surprises me. I think this is going to be an implosion year for Mac Brown, but I know everybody likes him. Seems like a good dude. Are you surprised North Carolina's favored, Luke's?
No. The quarterback is such a difference maker, and they've got 8 other starters back from last year's team. I think they'll be improved on defense. What does that mean, improvement? Because you went from really god-awful to does that mean you're going to be mediocre? Does that mean you're going to be competent? Does that mean you're going to be above average?
What happened? Did Gene Chizik forget how to coach?
No, I just don't think they have great players on that side of the ball, and they're trying to recruit to it. And obviously they're ahead of that curve on the offensive side and haven't caught up on the defensive side. They were a really poor tackling team a year ago, and especially early on in the season, it got a little bit better late. But I think the reason why North Carolina's favored is because of Drake May, and I'm not so sure that Vegas might be a little nervous about which Spencer Rattler do we see. Do we see the Spencer Rattler of the first 8 or 9 weeks last year, or do we see him versus Tennessee? Do we see him like he looked versus Clemson? Because when they relieved Marcus Satterfield, the offensive coordinator of his duties, he's now at Nebraska, that's when everything changed for Spencer Rattler. Can they carry that over, and can Spencer Rattler hit the ground running? And it'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be a heck of a football game, really evenly matched football game.
All right. Mississippi State fans will be locked into that because they play at South Carolina. It's a winnable road game, even though I think South Carolina is a slight favorite, but they will be playing South Carolina in 4 weeks, I think. Yeah, 3 home games, and then South Carolina gets Georgia before that game, and Mississippi State gets LSU. The fun of the SEC. Tom Luginbill, dude, have fun. Clemson, Duke, have a great weekend, and we'll talk next week.
Sounds good, man. Take care.
So he'll be calling Clemson, Duke, and Garrett Riley is now the offensive coordinator, Jason, for the Clemson Tigers. He was the offensive coordinator for TCU. His older brother is Lincoln Riley, the head football coach for Southern Cal. Our show is brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue. The official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds show. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It is good to be blue. Good morning. Welcome in Mike Detillier at 8:30 on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line.